Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
U.S. embassy protests spread across the Middle East as anger over anti-Islam film grows. Syrian warplanes pound Aleppo as UN special envoy arrives in Damascus. And Palestinian protesters call for end to Oslo peace accords. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
Demonstrations condemning the American film that offends Islam have spread to Beirut, Gaza, Tunisia, and Mauritania, during which protesters burned the American flag. In Bahrain, the Islamic Scholars Council condemned the offense to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his followers, and called for popular protests in all mosques in Bahrain on Friday at noon.
A storm of protests swept the Arab and Islamic world against the American film that offends Islam and the Prophet, peace be upon him and his followers. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip burned the American flag and pictures of two of the film's producers and stepped on them with their feet in front of the United Nations headquarters. They chanted slogans condemning the film and assured that they would defend the Prophet, peace be upon him and his followers, regardless of the consequences. And in a public festival in Beirut, various Lebanese groups, political and religious, Christian as well as Muslim, condemned the offensive film, which it considered to be repulsive intellectual terrorism that incites hate and comes as part of the American and Israeli campaign of hostility towards Islam. Festival participants called on Arab and Islamic ruling regimes to stop groveling before the U.S. administration and to stand up against sectarian and ideological extremism.
I feel that this film is a very disgusting act by those who filmed and directed it. We will never accept any offense to Islam.
Mauritanian youths also went out in a demonstration that covered the streets of Nouakchott, condemning the offensive film. Protesters gathered in front of the American embassy, calling for its shutdown and the expulsion of the American ambassador, which is the least that could be done for this criminal act. They also chanted slogans condemning this offensive film. In Tunisia, security forces used rubber bullets and tear gas to disperse a massive demonstration that gathered in front of the American embassy to protest against the offensive American film. And during the demonstration, protesters raised a black banner and burned the American flag while chanting slogans condemning the United States. The demonstrations that were organized in front of U.S. embassies around the world have forced different countries to impose strict security measures around the headquarters of their American diplomatic missions, and to deploy police and security forces around the headquarters of those embassies to protect them, especially in Asian countries.
The scope of demonstrations against the film that offended Islam has broadened as protests spread today to several Arab and Muslim cities.
Yemenis raided the U.S. Embassy's headquarters in Sana'a to protest the film as Yemeni security forces opened fire to disperse the demonstrators.
Our Al Jazeera correspondent said that the clashes around the embassy's headquarters ended just a short while ago. The storming of the U.S. Embassy in Sana'a followed a demonstration in which participants held signs and chanted slogans denouncing the production of the film and its broadcast on the internet.
Demonstrators chanted slogans saying that they can tolerate anything but insults to the Prophet, peace be upon him.
In Egypt, Mufti Dr. Ali Joma called on the United Nations to issue an international agreement to criminalize insulting religions, their symbols, and holy religious sites.
The Mufti denounced the violence being perpetrated against foreign embassies. On the other hand, the Egyptian Ministry of Health said that nearly 20 people were injured during escalating confrontations. They said these confrontations have been ongoing since yesterday around the American embassy in Cairo.
It is the first time since January 28th of last year that the police's armored vehicles have come so close to Tahrir Square like this. It's also the first time over the same period that the police have assumed sole responsibility in dealing with protests of this magnitude and without the army's assistance.
Why should we protest peacefully? We protested peacefully before. There are 5 armored vehicles firing at us. They're hitting us inside Tahrir Square. That's all I have to say.
We demand the expulsion of the American ambassador from Cairo.
The seesaw confrontations, which began in the early morning hours, led to injuries and suffocation among the ranks of the demonstrators and the police, as well as other material losses. This is in the absence of any efforts to calm the situation by either side of the concerned parties, especially by political blocs and factions.
What is happening is not right. There is a better way than this, and a better way to express ourselves. We can stand and defend the Prophet, our country, and the security of our country in a better way than this. Better than attacking my brother or vandalizing his car. This embassy is mine. It's my property, not America's property.
This is for America, to offer an official apology because our Prophet is a red line for us all.
After the government issued a statement condemning the offense against the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Egyptian president condemned the insulting film in a recorded message before embarking on a tour of Europe.
We, the Muslims and all Egyptians, reject any form of insult to our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whom we would sacrifice our lives for.
But it seems that all of these statements of condemnation were not enough to absorb the anger of the protesters who are awaiting the organization of demonstrations and protests on Friday in front of the main mosques in Cairo and other places as called for by Islamic blocs. While some see the clashes near the U.S. Embassy in Cairo as a test of the relationship between the police and demonstrators under the reign of President Morsi, others see it as a test of the relationship between the president himself, who belongs to the Muslim Brotherhood, and other Islamic groups and movements in the country. Abdul Basir Hassan, Al Jazeera, near the American Embassy in Cairo.
Muslims worldwide have been venting, as we've been saying, their anger over the production of this anti-Islam film in the U.S. The protests have also reached the Iranian capital, Tehran, where students have held a rally outside the Swiss embassy. Switzerland protects American interests in Iran. Iranian protesters have expressed support for similar demonstrations in Libya and Egypt. They say the U.S. government shares the blame for the production of the blasphemous film. Demonstrators have also called on Muslim nations to cut their relations with Washington. Meanwhile, several Iranian religious figures have also reacted to the sacrilegious film. Ayatollah Mohammad Nouri Hamadani said Muslims will not remain silent in the face of, quote, the evil move by the enemies of Islam. He said the United States will have to brace for harsher reactions by the Muslim world. Anti-U.S. protests over this film have spilled over into Saudi Arabia and in Kuwait. Protesters gathered in front of the U.S. Embassy in the Saudi capital Riyadh and the American consulate in the port city of Jeddah. Activists have called for mass anti-U.S. rallies in front of U.S. diplomatic missions in Saudi Arabia on Friday. The U.S. Embassy staff in Kuwait have been evacuated amid reports of protests against the anti-Islam American film.
In Syria, Assad's brigades continued their barbaric bombing of several areas using fighter jets and artillery. On the other hand, the Free Syrian Army achieved a notable advancement in the Maidan neighborhood in central Aleppo, according to military sources and witnesses.
Rockets, shells, and massacres, all of them spell a single word: killing. Dozens of people were killed or injured after two buildings were completely destroyed by explosive barrels dropped by al-Assad's planes on the Al-Maizar neighborhood in Aleppo. The bombardment also targeted the neighborhoods of Al-Sukari and Al-Qatarji, as well as other areas in Aleppo's countryside. In a new development, the Free Syrian Army announced the expansion of its control in Aleppo after seizing two security posts in the Al-Maidan and Al-Sheikh neighborhoods. Activists said that clashes erupted between the Free Syrian Army and the regime army in the Al-Maidan, Al-Sheikh, and Arqub neighborhoods.
Members of the Free Syrian Army destroyed one of the statues of the late Hafez al-Assad.
In Damascus, al-Assad's brigades in Shabiha resumed their shelling of the capital's southern neighborhoods, including al-Hajar al-Aswad, al-Qadam, and al-Tadamun. In addition, regime forces in Shabiha used bulldozers to demolish residents' homes in the Qabun neighborhood. The rebels said that regime forces assassinated former member of parliament Ahmed al-Turk and kidnapped 4 members of his family in Harasta in the countryside of Damascus. Meanwhile, a number of Syrian brigades announced the formation of a unified front called the Syrian Liberation Front. In Idlib province, regime shelling sparked fires in a number of buildings. In the town of Kastun in Hama's countryside, Assad's tanks indiscriminately shelled the residents' homes. In Deir ez-Zor, dozens were killed in a raid by the regime air force using Russian-made MiG planes on a school housing refugees in the town of Suwaiya. The shelling resulted in the deaths of 2 families, including women and children. Several neighborhoods in Deir ez-Zor and Abu Kamal also came under shelling.
On the political front, the UN Arab League envoy Lakhdar Brahimi arrived in Syria in his first visit since assuming his post. He met with Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim, and he is scheduled to meet with President Bashar al-Assad. Brahimi said that he realizes the difficulty of his mission, but vows to do everything in his power to assist the Syrian people.
During a visit to the European Union's headquarters, Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi reiterated that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad must step down.
We insist that the regime must change in Syria. That's what we've agreed upon with the European Union today, that we are all against what's being perpetrated by the regime, not only in words and statements, but also with persistence and action. It will take all kinds of pressure on this regime in order to allow Syrians to decide for themselves. This regime has no place in Syria after the killings and bloodshed committed against Syrians.
Hundreds of family members of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons protested on the 19th anniversary of the Oslo Accords signed by the Palestinian Authority and Israel. The protesters are demanding the immediate release of veteran prisoners who were supposed to be released in accordance with the agreement. The families expressed their solidarity with the prisoners on strike inside Israeli prisons. This comes at a time when protests have escalated against Salam Fayyad's government due to the current economic crisis.
كثرت رسائل الشارع الفلسطيني مع حلول الذكرى 19.
The messages of condemnation on the Palestinian streets increased on the 19th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Principles, or the Oslo Accords.
يسمى بالحركة الأسيرة في هذه المناسبة وذلك من خلال إعلان.
These messages were capped off with a new escalation by the so-called prisoners' movement on this occasion. They announced a strike to draw attention to the case of the veteran Palestinian prisoners inside Israeli jails.
قضى بعضهم أكثر من 20 عاما في السجن.
Of those 111 prisoners, some have spent more than 20 years in prison, and none of them have been released up until now. Israel was supposed to release the veteran prisoners in accordance with the Oslo Agreement within a specific scheduled time, something that has not been fulfilled after nearly 20 years. Their case remains marginalized and their suffering continues as the Israeli side rejects any real mutual agreement that could release them.
قد يفرج عنهم.
This is the 19th anniversary of the signing of the fateful Oslo Accords, which placed a political, economic, and social burden on our people and kept our prisoners behind bars. This accord placed our people in an open-air prison and kept the prisoners in the dungeons of Israeli jails. And now our people and prisoners are paying the price by sacrificing their freedom, lives, and blood.
معيشتهم ومن دمهم.
And up until now, the occupation and the international community continue to hold us to these agreements.
والمجتمع الدولي يلزمنا بها حان الوقت.
It is time to rebel against these agreements and for our people to embrace freedom and independence by continuing to struggle and by not groveling in front of the international community, which is biased towards the occupation's government.
الشارع الفلسطيني الذي تفجر غضبا في ظل اتفاق.
The Palestinian street erupted in anger in the wake of the worsening recent economic situation and demanded the removal of Prime Minister Salam Fayyad in what appears to be a rejection of the Palestinian Authority, which came to power as a result of the Oslo Accords.
القيادة الفلسطينية التي أصبحت ما بين سندان شارعها الملتهب واستحقاق.
The Palestinian leadership finds itself standing between a rock and a hard place as it continues to deal with the furious street and its legitimate right to have an administration to run its affairs, while dealing with the new reality imposed by Israel. This led to the entrenchment of settlements and the Judaization of the city of Jerusalem, according to Palestinians who responded to this pressure by going to the United Nations to confirm the failure of a political solution with Israel and by attempting to seek recognition of Palestine as a country under occupation.
فلسطين كدولة تحت الاحتلال.
The peace accord was supposed to offer peace and an independent state and to liberate Palestine from the occupation. But the occupation did not commit to the stages of the agreement or to giving the Palestinian people a Palestinian state after the transitional phase in 1999. Therefore, the suffering continues, and the Palestinian people are still struggling for their legal, political and legitimate rights.
التطورات الأخيرة التي يشهدها الشارع الفلسطيني تنذر بما يشبه موتا معلنا.
The latest developments witnessed by the Palestinian street warn of what seems to be the death certificate of the peace process between the Palestinian and Israeli sides. If this matter is not resolved, it will end the Oslo Accords, which its opponents view as having caused the Palestinian side to recognize Israel as a country, while never giving the Palestinians their country in return. Sama Hamdan, BBC.
In Bahrain, people are protesting on an almost daily basis against the Al-Khalifa rule despite the regime's heavy-handed crackdown. In towns and villages, protesters take to the streets calling for the downfall of the regime and the release of prisoners. Scores have been killed and hundreds more injured in the crackdown on dissent. Many others, including human rights activists and students, are held in jail without charge or trial. Among the detainees is prominent rights activist Nabil Rajab. He received a 3-year sentence on August 16th for his protest against Bahrain's monarchy. The court decision drew widespread criticism from rights groups, urging Bahrain to overturn the sentence and free Rajab immediately. But the Manama regime turned down international calls to free him and other political prisoners. Now a conference on Bahrain today is underway in the Lebanese capital Beirut, of which it ended just a little over an hour ago, in which organizers filed a human rights report entitled Bahrain, Citizens in the Grip of the Executioner. The report highlighted the rights violations by the sons of the Bahraini king and members of his family.
This report speaks about two important aspects. The first aspect is that those who were involved in these violations, they are the sons of the King of Bahrain and some of the members of the royal family and the ruling family. These people do not have political immunity and they don't have general immunity because of their jobs. And what is very important is that these people have no right to carry out these practices and these actions. This report, which we have launched, is a message to this authority and to the Bahraini government. This government must re-evaluate the file of torture in Bahrain, and it also must revise. There's also a message to the Bahraini judiciary. If the Bahraini judiciary, if it's still saying that it is a noble and neutral judiciary, then it must question those who were involved in this torture.
The Non-Aligned Movement, or NAM, has once again voiced its support for Iran's right to peaceful nuclear technology. The NAM bloc of nations of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, said Tehran's decision to use nuclear energy for civilian purposes must be respected. NAM called for a settlement of the Western dispute over Iran's nuclear energy program within the IAEA. The group also said any dispute regarding the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, should be resolved by means of diplomacy and within the framework of international laws. The NAM statement comes as the IAEA Board of Governors, which is heavily influenced by Western countries, has issued a non-binding resolution on Iran's nuclear energy program.
Prime Minister Netanyahu reiterated that he had a good conversation with U.S. President Barack Obama on Tuesday night. Netanyahu told the Jerusalem Post that he and Obama spoke about their common goal of stopping Iran from developing nuclear weapons and desire to closely coordinate efforts. Netanyahu declined to get into possible differences, but said that he is not shy about expressing his views on vital Israeli security concerns. Netanyahu told the Jerusalem Post that Israel is currently facing the greatest security challenge of any country on the face of the earth and that he must speak out. Israel's television's Ayala Hassan says that the tensions between Jerusalem and Washington are very real and diplomatic explanations will not change that fact. The United States and its Western allies have persuaded Russia and China to support an International Atomic Energy Agency resolution critical of Iran's nuclear defiance in hopes of demonstrating to Israel that diplomacy is an alternative to military force in pressuring Tehran to abandon its drive to acquire nuclear weapons. A vote on the resolution will take place today. However, even if the document, which demands that Iran stop activities that could be used to make a nuclear weapon, is approved, it cannot be enforced by the 35-member IAEA panel. Despite mounting evidence to the contrary, Iran continues to insist that its nuclear program has no military application.
In a letter dated August 29, 2012, Iran stated that the allegation of nuclear activities at the Parchin site was, I quote, baseless, end quote. However, the activities observed further strengthen our assessment that it is necessary to have access to the location at Parchin without further delay in order to obtain the required clarifications.
Some of the differences are in fact resolved, and still there are some differences. Among them, of course, are our concerned legitimate expectation for national securities. And if they are fulfilled, then we could have a framework based on criteria, both side responsibility, and we are ready to deal and engage to show that once again to the whole world that those allegations are baseless, in fact, and forged and fabricated.
The Israeli occupation's government issued a decision to confiscate more than 375 acres of citizens' land in the villages of Nablus Governorate, aiming to turn them into Israeli settlements perched on the citizens' agricultural lands.
These vast areas planted with olive trees remain threatened with confiscation after an Israeli decision was issued that would allow occupation forces to lay their hands on more than 200 acres of Zawaita, Ijnasinia, Al-Nakura and Beit Iba in the western part of Nablus, and nearly 175 acres in the villages of Burin and Awarta in the southeastern part of the governorate.
What is happening on the ground is organized terrorism by the Israeli government. The Israeli government and the settlers are two faces of the same coin. One of them cuts off and shuts down roads and tears down and burns trees. And the other, the Israeli occupation's army, confiscates hundreds of acres, especially before the olive harvest season. The lands that are being confiscated are all planted with olive trees, and we are approaching the olive harvest season. This even combats the Palestinian citizen farmers' source of living.
Perhaps what landowners in the villages of Zawaita, Al-Nakura and Beit Iba are suffering from is a presence of a bypass road leading to the Shafi Shamron settlement, which is the road that separates thousands of acres of this village's lands from each other. It remains a main concern that irritates landowners who have been deprived of accessing their land for over 15 years. This comes with the Israeli government's plans that seek to Judaize vast areas of the citizens' land in the governorate of Nablus and is aimed at seizing it. The citizens here feel very concerned over the future of their land. It is worth noting here that the occupation's measures on the ground are aimed at implementing a clear plot by the occupation's forces and its settlers to confiscate thousands of agricultural acres through settler attacks on the citizens and their land, attacks which occur in most governorates of the nations. The decision to confiscate vast areas of the citizens' land in the villages of Nablus governorate comes within the context of preventing citizens from reaching their land, especially as the olive harvest season is approaching. From Zuwaita, west of Nablus, Khalil Abu Arab, Palestine TV.
Under the protection of the occupation's army, settlers raided the holy Al-Aqsa mosque to perform Talmudic rituals. A number of guards at Al-Aqsa confirmed that the settlers raided the mosque from the direction of Bab al-Maghariba and toured its yards and its different facilities. They noted that a confrontation was about to occur between people who were praying and the occupation's police. The guards added that a number of foreign tourists who were with the settlers behaved inappropriately, contrary to behavior that respects the holiness of Al-Aqsa.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincote Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.